Lord, may the words on my lips, the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you. This day our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. And amen.
Amen.
Am I okay? I'm not okay. Gord, are you working some magic back there for me? Is that working a little bit better?
There we go.
Off and on? Gord, are you back then? We should have a microphone working. We've been playing with it a little bit. It sounds okay. Good. Thank you. And Gord's been working on it.
Still going on.
On and off. If it's going on and off, I'll maybe turn it off and work with it. You let me know because it's hard for me to tell. One of my favorite authors is Max Lucado. Some of you are familiar with his work. He's the fellow that suggested that if God had a refrigerator, that your picture would be on it. Very kind of down-to-earth, great theologian. He tells a funny story about bread. We're going to be looking at bread today. He tells a funny story about bread. His wife called him and asked him to pick up a loaf of bread on the way back from work one time. I'm going to maybe just use this microphone here. She was nervous, says Lucado. Rightly so. I'm the Exxon Valdez of grocery shopping. My mom once told me to buy butter and milk. I bought buttermilk. I mistook the tube of hair cream for toothpaste. I'm a charter member of the Clueless Husbands Shopping Squad. I can relate to the fellow who came home from the grocery store with 1 carton of eggs, 2 sacks of flours, 3 boxes of cake mix, 4 sacks of sugar, and 5 cans of cake frosting. And his wife looked at the sacks of the groceries and lamented, I should never have numbered the list. So Adam says that he went into the grocery store after being asked to pick up that loaf of bread and walks past his favorite cereal. So, of course, he picks up a box of his favorite cereal and wonders when he's got that favorite box of cereal if maybe there's enough milk at home. So he goes over to the milk area and picks up a jug of milk, which reminds him of Oreos, because he likes to dip his Oreos in the milk. I think maybe I'm just going to turn this off. We'll work on it a little bit. And as he picks up a package of Oreos, of course, they're situated near the potato chips, and so he has to pick up a pack of potato chips as well. And as he works his way back towards the checkout counter, he passes the ice cream freezer and picks up some ice cream as well. Ladies, this is the way men shop. I hope you appreciate that. And he comments, he says that he thought that he had every item for a happy and fulfilled life in his shopping cart. And of course he gets home, and some of you who are a little ahead of me on this one, first words from his wife as he lay out this spread before him as if he had just come back from the hunt, a successful hunt. His wife says to him, Max, where's the bread? Back to the grocery store. In our gospel story, after feeding the 5,000, the fish and the bread, the crowd saw Jesus was not there shortly after he did this. And so we read they get in their boats and they ride over to Capernaum where Jesus is. And they say to him, Rabbi, when did you get here? In other words, like, we didn't even see you leave. Like, what happened to you? We need you. We want you. And Jesus' response was interesting for that. He said, very truly, I tell you, you're looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. In other words, because you're hungry. You searched me out, physically hungry. Do not work for food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. In other words, what John is saying here is he's saying that he describes the miracles of Jesus not as miracles but as signs. And the signs point to who Jesus was, that Jesus was the Messiah. And so he thinks of these not so much as miracles, but as signs of who Jesus is. And so the bread was not just something for the belly, but something
more importantly, for the soul. For the Jews, the Moses was the one who provided manna for them as they left Egypt. Jesus corrects them in saying, it wasn't Moses that gave you that bread, it was God that gave you that bread. That bread came from God. I come from God. I am the true bread of heaven. Manna is food for the body, whereas Jesus considered himself to be a provision for the soul, the bread of life. The story of the woman from the well, they didn't understand, the woman at the well didn't understand when Jesus said that he was the living water. And in a similar way, the crowd didn't understand when Jesus said that he was the food of life, that it was him that was the manna. I am the bread of life, Jesus said. He who comes to me will never be hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. At the well, Jesus said to the woman, if you drink this water from this well, then you'll be thirsty again. But I give you living water that will satisfy you and satisfy your thirst forever. In today's reading, Jesus declares that he is the bread that satisfies and satisfies forever. And I think we miss, when he says that he is the bread of life, what Jesus is really saying. When he said that he is the bread, it would mean something different from us than it would be for the people of his time. Today, bread is a nice add-on to our diet. And we have all kinds of bread. We got white bread and brown bread and rye bread and flat bread and corn bread and sourdough bread and many, many different kinds of bread. And bread comes in all kinds of different ways. It comes as a biscuit, it comes as a roll, it comes as a bun. It comes in all kinds of different ways. But in Jesus' day, it was possible that the only meal that somebody would have 3 times a day would be a plain barley bread, very, very common bread, not a very tasty bread, but one that would sustain them. And bread was sustenance for them, and they equated bread to life, because if they wouldn't understand life without bread and without having bread. So Jesus was saying to them, I am providing abundant life, everlasting life. If you want life, choose me. In preparing for this, coming across an illustration that perhaps you knew about that I didn't know about, kind of a sad illustration, centers around World War II, and in particular what they referred to as the junior Gestapo that Hitler formed. And it was for 12 and 13-year-old boys. And what they did in preparation for war, in preparation for them being soldiers, was they gave them some jobs that were really inhumane jobs, treated them very poorly. The biggest problem with this junior Gestapo happened at the end of the war, when these young boys who had been separated from their families or possibly lost their families started wandering around the streets, hungry, in search of shelter. And there was a period of time before aid programs came to their rescue. And tent cities were formed, and the boys were brought in, and they were looked after by doctors and psychologists in order to restore them mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But at night, the doctors would report that these boys would wake up screaming in terror, and they determined that it had to do with the period of time that they were hungry. And so what they decided to do is they decided to take a piece of bread and a chunk of bread and give it to each of the boys to go to bed that night, and to save that bread and eat it in the morning. These boys that had known starvation now had a piece of bread that was security for them, and it is reported that they all slept soundly that night. after years, perhaps, certainly months of hunger, that assurance of food for them brought them a peace that they hadn't experienced in recent time. We really take bread for granted in our society. But for many over the course of history, and for the time, people in the time of Jesus, bread was vitally important. Without bread, life was not possible. And so we have this idea of Christ alone satisfying that which is our deepest needs. One pastor put it this way. He said, people will do anything to be satisfied in life. In fact, people are searching for life and meaning in life. The drunkard is looking for life. The drug addict is looking for life. The adulterer is looking for life. The corporate climber is looking for life. Even the redneck, however defined, is looking for life. In each person, God has created a void, and that void is the desire for meaning and fulfillment in life. Even though all are looking for life, many are searching in the wrong places. Jesus is the life people are looking for in life. I believe firmly that all are in the process of searching for Jesus. Each person here today is in the process of coming to Jesus. They think they're searching for meaning in life, but what they're really searching for is Jesus. Interesting understanding of who Jesus is. In the Lord's Prayer that we'll be reciting through communion, the Lord's Prayer begins with supplications to God. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. But we get to the petition part of it, and it's, give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. And in that prayer, what Jesus is referring to when he gave us that prayer is the physical bread. But there's also this idea of bread for the soul that's connected with that as well. I want to close today with a fable that you might have heard of in the past. It's the story of a man who was very much in love with a blind woman. And the blind woman felt that she was going to be a burden to him, but he would do anything for this woman. Gave him great pleasure to be with this woman. And he would do anything in order to see her sight restored as well. She told him, choose another and move on so that you're not burdened with me. But he was unrelenting. He loved her, and it was a pleasure to be with her. And one time, they heard together some good news that there were doctors that were coming into that area that were able to do eye transplants. And they were amazed by this and by the possibility that she might have sight. But over the course of time, they were able to find no donors for her as a transplant. So selflessly and unbeknownst to the woman, the man volunteered to donate his eyes so that she could see. And so the both of them went to the hospital together, her unknowing that the sacrifice that he had made for, he had the transplant. A little bit later in the hospital, the woman recovers, and she opens her eyes, and she discovers for the first time in her life how beautiful she is, and she's quite taken with how beautiful she is. And then the man that donated his eyes walked into her room and called her by name, and her answer was, "Who are you?" She said, "I'm sorry, I can't be with an eyeless man. I need somebody handsome. I need a handsome man by my side. Don't you see how beautiful I am?" So dejected and hurt, the man walked out of the woman's life. Family came to visit. The woman told about this man who came into her room with audacity, described the man, and they realized that it was the man that had donated his eyes. And they told her of the sacrifice that he had made on her behalf. And she was devastated and convicted as well, and she went out at the end of the story to search unsuccessfully for the man that donated eyes to her and sacrificed on her behalf. And that's the fable. Someone has made a sacrifice, an even greater sacrifice, not just eyes, but life. Jesus gave his life to us so that we might have life, as Scripture says, so that we might have life abundantly. A sacrifice far greater than the sacrifice of mere eyes. And ours is a gain that's far greater than the woman's. Jesus, the bread of life, came so that we might have life and have it abundantly. Are you, like that young woman, going to respond to that gift that Jesus gave to us with indifference or with undying gratitude for that which Jesus did for us? Let us pray. Gracious God, we stumble through life often not recognizing that which we are blessed with, often not recognizing that we are so fortunate. We use the example of bread today, that we have all different kinds of bread, and it's just an add-on to a typical meal that we're able to have because of your provision for us. We hear stories about these young boys in the junior Gestapo and the hunger that they went through, the hunger that they experienced, the hunger that most of us have never experienced. And yet we take life and we take you for granted. And we take that great gift that you have given to us, your Son, for granted as well. So we ask in particular this week that we would recognize the blessings that we receive day by day. Not only physical blessings, but blessings for the soul as well.